Continuing our reading in Hellbent for Election by Phyllis Speshock, Chapter 12. While Alexis was recovering himself and vowing hereafter to abide by the knowledge he had been given and not tamper with what was not intended to be his concern, I stood by the kitchen doorway and watched the relatives trickle in and knot together, greeting each other. Their smiles were wooden, their remarks razor-edged. "Come," I said, motioning Alexis away from the sink. "I'll point them out to you." "Stop gesturing," he said. "When will you remember that you only stir the air?" But I forfeited the pleasure of answering him for the better game of listening to relatives. "That's Uncle Stern," I said, when Alexis was at my side. "And that's Uncle Harsh. And that's Aunt Sedate. And there's Cousin Blowsy. And there's Uncle Lofty. And Aunt Severe. And Cousin Strict. Cousin Strict is the son of Aunt Severe and Uncle Stern. Cousin Blowsy is Cousin Bump's brother. Aunt Sedate is married to Uncle Lofty. Uncle Harsh is a widower." "I don't see Della," Alexis said. "You won't," I promised. "She wouldn't be caught dead with this pack, or perhaps," I snickered, "that's the only way she would be caught. But listen, they speak for themselves." "Did you notice the new carpeting?" Aunt Fussy said, extending a hand to Aunt Sedate. "Looks much better than it did, wouldn't you say?" "I noticed," said Aunt Sedate, gathering herself up. "If you are the sort concerned with material possessions, I can see how it would be impressive." Said Aunt Fussy. "The stained glass window has been repaired, too, and some paintings added. Did you see?" Aunt Sedate looked straight forward. "We have painted the inside of our auditorium dead white and have removed that musty cushioning and varnished the pews." "Well," said Aunt Fussy, "if you feel that does honor to him." Aunt Sedate's expression was unchanging. "We believe he has a plain man, and we meek and lowly." "Lowly?" said Cousin Blowsy, joining the pair. "How can you get a king lowly? Oh, myself, I take it he was a bit of a connoisseur, knew a good thing when he saw it, and didn't mind speaking his tongue. Say, isn't that stuff cooked yet? Gives a man an appetite standing out in the graveyard listening to a bunch of lies about old Willie." "Of the nerve!" I spat. But Alexis waved me silent as another batch of them arrived. "Who are these?" he asked. I bypassed my exasperation and grunted. "Oh, that's Uncle Crafty and Aunt Sparing. And they're from my mother's side. And that's Cousin Trifle from my father's side. And Cousin Timoris from my mother's side. Uncle Stoic and Aunt Solid from my mother's side. Cousin Rational, Cousin Staid, Cousin Obstinate from my father's side. Cousin Flounder, Cousin Hasty, Cousin Fancy." "Enough," said Alexis. "I shall figure the rest out. They are about to sit down. I want to hear them pray." They gathered around the tables, and a moment of silence and throat-clearing followed. "Harsh," said Aunt Fussy, taking charge as usual, "since you are the eldest, would you—" Uncle Harsh, at the end of the table, scraped his chair loudly as he rose. "Our God and our Father," he chanted nasally, "we have come together to mourn one who has submitted to sin and violence." He paused for the amens while I shouted, "Hogwash!" And Alexis shushed and motioned me. "Maintain yourself, Hellbent." "We have no doubt that his soul shall writhe in torment," Uncle Harsh went on. "Therefore, let those of us remaining take heed of ourselves and keep to thy ways as we understand them, and learn from the horrible example set before us. For we know that thou art a God of terrible punishment, and hath laid down laws which must be kept. We stand before you with a free conscience, knowing each of us has, in his own small way, done his best to assist the infidel who passed from our midst. We ask no leniency, for thou art unbending. Only apply this lesson to our lives and keep it before us as a reminder of what we must do and be. For we ask it all in his name. Oh, the monster, I groaned out. That vile, despicable, loathsome, detestable, odious, heinous, repulsive Hellbent, Alexis warned. If you are not soon silent, I will request divine power to halt your permission to speak at all. Now, I have been sent down here on a mission on your behalf, so do try to contain yourself and allow me to determine how well-founded your complaints are and what should be done about them. If you had only remained silent and quiet, this might have been a score for your side. Up to now, you have aired mostly sniveling little gripes, but not a lot of actual malpractice. If you sincerely want to win your case, stop giving in to these juvenile displays. He looked as if he meant business, as if he might fan his fingers before my face and say, poof, and I would be silenced. Sorry, I murmured, not another word. They began to eat then, and Alexis walked slowly around the table, motioning me to follow at his heels, and listened to scraps of conversations. Have you heard from Vex lately? Aunt Priggish asked Aunt Sparing. I heard she was working in some sort of establishment. We haven't heard directly from her since she left, said Aunt Sparing. No one has, not even Della. But some friends of ours said that someone sounding like her had bought part interest in a restaurant. You see, I understand she got quite a settlement from Thrill when they parted. Our side of the family was always quite watchful about money. Speaking of course, money, Cousin Blowsy chimed in. How do you come out with that lawsuit, Uncle Crafty? Take the township for a good haul, did you? Uncle Crafty's eyes narrowed. No need for humor, Blowsy, he said coldly. As I see it, business is business, and he would be the last to be wasteful or negligent. I remember he stretched a few loaves a long way and picked up the fragments. That makes sense, good sense to me, said Cousin Rational. Can't let people make fools of us. I agree to that, said Uncle Stern. Trouble with believers is that we give in the impression we're too soft. Got to let them know we aren't pushovers. Look at what he did to the money changers in the temple. Can't stand for any nonsense. Getting back to money, Blowsy broke in. I suppose old Willie left everything to Della and that adopted daughter of hers. Several snickers rippled around the table. Adopted indeed, said Cousin Fancy, brushing crumbs from her ruffled blouse. Whatever reputation the rest of us had left was blown into bits by that little maneuver. See what I mean? Said Aunt Fussy to Cousin Prissy, who had joined the group red-eyed and a few minutes late. See what comes of getting involved where we aren't? Cousin Prissy started to cry anew and left the table. Cousin Fussy shook her head. Grim and I have done all in our power to protect that girl, and here she is 35 and still so naive. That one thing, said Aunt Severe, that I was glad to note Harsh mentioned in his prayer. Each of us has done his best or her best to set an example. If Vex and Taunt went wrong, it was certainly through no weakness on our part. If I said it once, I said it 100 times. Stern, we have been our level best. If those two refuse to shape up, then they will have to face the consequences. Cousin Timoris shivered. I'm afraid of him, she said, when I think of all he can do and all he did to the Israelites. Mustn't get emotional, said Aunt Stolid. Do what's right, and you have no need to get wrought up in the one direction or the other. As far as I can seem to make out, Uncle Stoic added, that was their whole problem, too concerned with pleasure and pain. Wanted the pleasure for themselves and the pain for the other fellow. That's no fit or healthy outlook. I can see what makes the difference, said Cousin Trifle with a shrug. What's done is done. He'll get his way anyway, so why worry? The thing is to go on. Does Vicey know that Cousin Wilful is her real father and that Della only adopted her to get off the hook? There were a couple of gasps, but Blosey laughed out loud. Well, said Cousin Fancy, everyone in our set has whispered it, so it's just as well somebody shouted it. I've done my best to keep up appearances, but it hasn't been easy. The only compensating thought I have left is that he knows what we suffer, and he will reward. Cousin Strict nodded. That's a good point, Fancy. It was a pity none of us could get that across to Wilful while there was still hope. Poor damned soul. If he'd only let us get within speaking distance, we might have changed his entire course. I'm with Trifle, said Cousin Obstinate. What's done is done. Wilful had his chance and he blew it. No sense mourning over the past and no sense wishing he would change the rules. Wilful's got his just desserts. Speaking of desserts, said Blosey, didn't you say something about apple squares, Mumsy? Aunt Priggish flustered and pretended annoyance. Naughty boy, she chided and hurried off to the kitchen. For a moment there was silence, and then Cousin Rational said, That was some preposterous performance old Della put on at the graveside this morning, pretending to faint and having to be carried off. It scared me, said Cousin Timoris. I thought she'd tip over the casket, and I thought, what if he came rolling out? Oh, nothing to get excited about, said Cousin Stade. Just Della's way of getting out of doing the decent thing, coming to the luncheon with the rest of us. Never took a responsibility seriously in her whole life. Never took him seriously, either, or she'd have mended her ways. What was the frivolous idea of having that doctor from the theological seminary preach the sermon anyway? If she bore a childish grudge against the old shepherds, she could have asked the new ones, but that's Della, flighty even in a time like this. Cousin Flounder shifted in his chair. You know, I was wondering about that myself. Spoke in such concepts that I didn't understand a word he said. Did any of the rest of you? I have a hard enough time getting things straight as it is, without some high-sounding professor fouling me up. That was undoubtedly the idea, said Uncle Lofty. Della's way of striking out at us and at the same time consoling herself. The context of the eulogy, which she hoped would be above our heads, was that Wilful understood more about him than we suspected, and whether or not we liked it, he was as deserving as any of the rest of us. Oh, those big words don't tangle me up, but neither do his teachings. And I can tell you here and now, Della has got another think coming. There was an interval of head shaking and tongue clicking, and then Cousin Hasty rose and said, Well, I must be off. I'm chairman of a little study group which meets at 2. Have a 3:30 appointment with the music director about the new choir robes. At 4, I meet with the quartet. 5:15, another rehearsal with the teenagers. If this hadn't been my day off, I never would have made it at all. Must be about my father's business, you know. Shortly thereafter, the luncheon broke up. That's the end of chapter 12.